Now in this course, you're going to learn how to wire up an irrigation controller. You're going to learn how to install the reticulation in wiring, install the solenoid valves, wire up the solenoid valves, put the solenoid boxes together. You're going to learn tips and tricks for what's good and what isn't good, my favorite parts on the job. You'll also learn how to install the main supply line between the solenoid valves and the plumbing connection. You'll learn about the electrical and plumbing side that's required for an irrigation system and more. So this is one of the most important parts of the irrigation system, and it's the source. This is your main tap, your isolation valve, which enables you to shut the irrigation off if there's a problem. And this is a check valve, a one-way valve that allows water through but doesn't allow water back. That protects your drinking system. So this isolation tap is so important, because if you ever have a problem, you want to be able to shut that off. This check valve is actually a double check valve. There's two check valves in here. It's called a dual check valve, and that allows water through, never allows water back. Otherwise, if there's a pressure loss, you can end up sucking what's in the irrigation system back into your drinking supply, which you don't want to do. These are a legal requirement, 100% essential, and if you're putting in a new irrigation system, you really need one of these. And always use a licensed plumber. The other thing about these taps is they're a ball valve. There's a ball inside there that just moves. The old style tap had a gate valve, so you'd twist a round circular tap, and as you twisted it, the gate would rise up and fall down. They tend to rust and drop down, which can be very confusing when you're problem solving. So this ball valve, it's a lot stronger, it's a lot better, longer lasting, and we prefer it. Okay, so to summarize, this is called a plumber's cut-in. You should get supplied a ball valve and a dual check valve. Should be all threaded up nice and neat for you. Make sure that you've got enough room to work with. So I made sure this was put in a good location, far enough off the edge there that we could put a valve box over it. And always use a licensed plumber if you're cutting into the copper like this, so that they can put this tap on for you and do your plumber's cut-in. Very important. So I'm going to show you me installing the master solenoid valve now. Once it's installed, I'm going to explain what the master solenoid is and what it does. But it will be easier for me to show you once it's installed. So watch on. So this is the master solenoid. This is what a solenoid valve looks like as well. You can see it's got the main body of the valve. This is the solenoid, the electrical component at the top. This is a bleeder, which I'll show you shortly. And with these particular valves, you can replace the internals of them. See those screws? You can unscrew them and replace the insides of the valves if there's ever a problem. And these are the wires that attach to the irrigation wiring that goes back to the controller. And this particular valve is the master solenoid, the one we're going to use, the Rainbird DV100. You can see it's got the tested sticker on it. You can see it's got those bits there, which are internal threaded openings and exits. You might ask, what is a master valve? Why is it important? The main supply line should never be under pressure. That means there should never be a continuous flow of water in this main pipe. This main pipe goes to the other solenoid valves. What the master solenoid does is it holds the full force of the water back at the copper here. It's threaded on nice and tight, and it helps prevent excess water loss and major leaks that leak all the time. Without a master solenoid, the main piping that's between the solenoid valves and the copper is under pressure consistently. And if you have a failed solenoid, which means it opens up by itself so the seal can fail and they can turn on, just like you can get a tap that starts to drip. Solenoids can do that, but they can do it at full flow. So you can lose hundreds of thousands of litres if you're not aware of it. Also, you might have a leaking fitting as well. And what a master solenoid does is really helps protect the system. It contains the full force of water back at the copper. Now in the controller, there's two wiring ports. One says M or P. That's for the master valve, or some call it pump. And also, you've got the individual sockets or individual terminals for the individual solenoids. Now solenoids are just electronic taps. That's all they are, in simplest terms. It's an electronic tap, wires go to it, your controller on the wall sends a signal to the valve and tells it to turn on. So when you've got a master solenoid, what happens is it sends a signal to the master solenoid to turn on and the valve at the same time. So this valve opens up, but it needs water. The controller will also tell the main solenoid to turn on, which will allow water to go through this main pipe to your valve manifold, which will then allow water through the individual valve. So for instance, when the master solenoid turns on, water is going to flow through this pipe into here. But these solenoids, unless they turn on, water's not going to come out the other end to the sprinkler line. So when you turn on valve 1, let's say this is valve 1, the controller will send a signal to this valve, the master valve, which the pipe goes to the valve manifold, and it will also send a signal to valve 1 or valve 2 or whatever it is, but it won't send a signal to the other valves. So these valves won't turn on, but the master valve's turned on, there's water in the main pipe and that valve's turned on. So the water flows from the master valve through the main pipe and out through the valve that the controller has told to turn on to the sprinklers for that zone. So it's a double fail-safe. In order for you to have a continuous leak all the time, the master solenoid would need to leak and the solenoid would need to leak for the sprinklers to stay on all the time. It's absolutely critical that you've got a main solenoid if you're operating off the water mains. If you've got a bore, you don't need a master solenoid because the bore pump is the master solenoid. However, you do need other things like a pressure relief valve and sometimes a filter and things like that. But this video isn't about bores, it's about installing solenoids off the mains. And that's why a master solenoid is so important. We're going to be installing the master valve. Now this training isn't about particular brands and I get no payment for mentioning brands in this training. But I must say that I love the Rainbird valves. This is called a Rainbird DV100 as per your parts list. And it's tested. So they test it to 1000 kPa in a factory. Put a lot of pressure on it and make sure it's working, not leaking, functioning. And that's why I like them, just for that security and peace of mind to know you've got a good quality valve that's already been tested. Been installing these for many, many years. Now my plumbers already put thread seal on here, but one thing with thread seal tape is that you always want to thread in the direction you're screwing on. So this is screwing on like that, and so it's been threaded in the same way. Otherwise you can wind it off. Thread seal tape is primarily used for fittings that are under pressure that are threaded. For example, valve sockets or anything that may leak. This white thread seal tape that's on your parts list is one of the best ones to use, and it's what we recommend. Now off this master solenoid, we are going to be connecting blue line plumbing piping to the solenoid valve manifold. But just in case you want to use PVC, I am going to show you how to connect PVC onto this master solenoid first so you can see. So I've got two fittings. I've got a PVC valve socket like that. It's got a bit the PVC pipe can go into and be glued into, and then it's got a threaded 25mm end that goes into the solenoid. And for the blue line plumbing piping, I've got the same thing. The blue line will go in there, although it's not glued, and this threaded bit here will screw into the valve. So the valve goes this way. You can always see there's a little arrow. Often it's on the side of valves or on the back, but normally this larger knob, the solenoid electrical component, is at the front of a valve in the direction that the water is going. So if you want to know which way the valve socket screws on, you can just screw it in lightly like that. So it's screwing on that way, like that. So we're going to get this thread seal tape, and we're going to follow the same direction. Now try and do it fairly tight and go across the whole thing. Just be careful not to put too much on at the start or it won't thread into the valve. You can put more on towards the middle and the back. Go around it a good number of times, nice and tight, and then just break it off. And we're going to start screwing that in by hand. One thing to be really mindful of, if it feels like it's cross-threading or it's not going in easily, stop, start again. Sometimes you've put too much thread seal tape on or you've got it at the wrong angle. So do it up as tight as you can comfortably by hand. And then once you've got it to a certain tightness, get either a pair of Stilsons or a large pair of multi-grips like this. And what we'll do is we will just use these to finish it off. and do it out reasonably firmly. Now I'm not going to do this up too tight because I've got to take it off in a minute. Now just to recap, just so everyone knows what a master valve does. A master valve is screwed onto the copper. Now my plumber's put plenty of thread seal tape on there, but I'm just going to give that a wash just to make sure there's no dirt on there. I'll give the start of the solenoid a bit of a wash too. Now I'm just going to take the top of this valve off. Be very careful to keep this clean, just so it doesn't hit the dirt, so it screws on nicely. So I've got that on. That's going on nice and easily. Okay, I'm just going to give that a dunk in my bottle of water. I'm going to put the solenoid back on the valve. Okay, the reason I did that was hitting the dirt, so I wanted to screw on easily. Now we're just going to turn on this isolation tap. The master valve will turn on for a minute and then switch off, and then we're going to check underneath for leaks and make sure it's not leaking. There we go, it's switched straight off. No leaks. No leaks, that's working really nicely. Now if you want to open up a solenoid manually, they've got a little thing called a bleeder on the top of them. Here, I'll show you. Okay, see this little thing here? If you unscrew that, that will turn the solenoid on manually, the master solenoid. Then to switch it off, you just twist it firmly tight again. Don't go too hard or you'll break it. Just until it's firm. Same as this coil here. You can turn a solenoid manually by twisting this coil. Like that. And then switching it off like that. Okay, but this is called a bleeder. So that's what I'm going to do on the master solenoid. I'm going to turn this bleeder off and on, just to test it. Alright, I'll turn this bleeder on. I'll switch it off. Beautiful. That's exactly what we want. This is the glue that I like to use, Christie's Red Hot Blue Glue. The lid's a little bit hard to get off when it's new, so get your vice grips, get it onto the lid and twist. Now this stuff stains like anything, so be super careful not to get it on any surfaces. Okay, so this is PVC piping, class 12, 25mm PVC piping as per your parts list. You want to put a liberal amount around the outside like that. Not too much, not too little, and a good amount. The same as in here. Put a decent amount on the whole way around. And then push it in and twist it. Hold it in till it's firm. Make sure it's not going to pop out. And this glue dries almost instantly. It's super, super strong. You see this valve manifold here? This is the manifold that's going to go on the other side. So this is the master solenoid. These solenoids are going to go on the solenoid pit away from the master solenoid. But if we were going to be using PVC, this here is a female valve socket. So we'd put thread seal on this end of our valve manifold. We would screw this 25mm female threaded socket, we'd thread seal this bit, and then we'd screw our female 25mm threaded valve socket nice and tight, using some pliers onto that bit there. And this piping would run up and connect, we'd just connect them together with some glue, like we've just done with that there. So PVC is very commonly used. I use PVC. I'm using a blue line main supply line for this property just because it's so rocky getting underneath the drive. Once we're through the other side of the drive, we'll convert it back to PVC. I'm going to take this valve socket off now, and we're going to do the job in blue line piping. So this is our 3G male connector. You can see that. It's got a 25mm threaded piece here. And this bit here is what the blue line plumbing piping pushes into. And that is going to screw into this solenoid here, into the master solenoid. Because we're not using PVC, I'll remove that PVC. Bearing in mind, you'd normally put this on a lot tighter. I didn't put it on as tight because we were going to remove it. Okay, so remember, work out which way the thread is going. So it's going that way, spinning that way, so we're going to put the thread seal tape that way as well. Okay, so put your thread seal tape on. Do it up by hand first, nice and tight. And then we'll grab a pair of pliers and just tighten it up a little bit more. Just remember to be gentle with the copper. And go till it's firm. Alright, we're going to be using this strong blue line plumbing piping, and we're going to connect this into the male 3G connector, which comes off the master solenoid, and this is our main supply pipe, or the start of our main supply pipe. This piping is going to run from the main master solenoid valve to the other solenoid valves, or what we call the solenoid manifold, which is a setup of solenoids. So we're going to be installing the first part of the blue line main supply line. And I'm just going to measure and cut a bit of blue line piping. We'll go to 43. So with the blue line piping, it does come in a roll. So it is a little bit bent. So sometimes you've got to straighten it a bit. Lay it out in the sun, in the hot sun, if you want to straighten it first. So I'll do a close up now so you can see how I install this inside this male connector. So with these blue line fittings, you can actually take these end pieces off, but you don't need to. Just loosen it off. And then get the bit of pipe, and it's going to push in all the way to back here somewhere. So wiggle it. If it's not going in, you'll feel it hit the end. If you're unsure, you can see how far it's went in and just check it. So that's went right in there. So push it in till it hits the back, and then just tighten it up by hand till it's hand tight. Okay, it's not going to move now. Grab your large multi-grips once that's done, and just give it a bit more of a tighten up till it's nice and firm. Now we'll be flushing this main pipe, so try not to get dirt in it, but if I get a little bit of dirt in it, I will be flushing it. So just remember, loosen off the fitting, push the blue line in till it hits the base, tighten it up by hand, and then use vice grips, multi-grips, Stilsons, whatever, just to tighten it up nice and firm. Don't go too hard or you'll end up breaking stuff, just do it till it's firm. So I'm actually connecting into an existing main supply pipe that is already on this property. We're going to be running this main supply pipe across that way. So we'll go across the other side in a bit, and we'll run the rest of the main supply line and connect up the solenoid valves. So again, I've just loosened off the fitting here. I'm connecting into some other existing valves on the property as we go. So just so you know why I've got a T and not an elbow here. So the blue line piping is pretty easy to work with. You just cut your bits of pipe, you get your elbows and your T's, So your 3G elbows, your 3GTs. Push the pipe in. Put your fittings on where they need to go. Tighten them up. It's pretty straightforward. The good thing about it is it can spin like that. The pipe spins even once you tighten it up. So if you need to change the angle or direction, you can do so. So we've got the main supply line going this way. And like I said, I've just connected into some existing solenoids that go up across the hill there a little bit. So we'll connect this up and then we'll go across the other side and run the rest of the main supply line to the solenoid valves and install the solenoid manifold, which I'm really excited to show you. So do this up nice and tight. And this blue line piping is super strong. Lasts a really long time. You can't go wrong with it. How good does this look? We've got our main supply line. It's going across here and we're running it to our valves. Normally you wouldn't have to tee off to other valves. You just run it and elbow it across to wherever you're going to put your bank of solenoid valves. I try to keep my solenoid valves in the same spot if I can. Front ones in one spot, back ones in another spot. But it really does depend on the job. Sometimes you have to have them in different locations and there's a whole range of reasons for doing things the way that we do them. I'll run a bit of conduit down for this bit of existing wiring. And when I run the wiring for the rest of the solenoids, I'll connect a couple of existing valves on the property in here inside the solenoid valve box. Okay, but that's our master solenoid, not wired up, but set up. And remember what I was saying, when the controller switches off, it switches off the solenoid valve in the ground. It also switches off the master solenoid, which then means all the water force is contained back here at the copper, and there's no water under pressure inside the pipe, the main pipe going to the solenoid valves. So the master valve is protecting your system from leaks, and it's a double fail-safe. Rightio, on to the next thing. Okay, we're going to wire up the master solenoid. So this is it here. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to need a few things. You're going to need your Scotch lock wiring connectors, these blue ones here. You're going to need your insulation tape, this black tape, or it comes in different colors, but you're going to need this insulation tape. Okay, a pair of cutters, and a pair of pliers, large pair of pliers. Now I'll show you these wire connectors. So this is the wire connectors. When you push the wire in, you push it through those holes, and it comes all the way through to here. You can see the wires here. So it pushes all the way through there, and you'll see the end of the wire here, this clear tube, there. So when you push the wires through, push them right in, okay? And then you tighten this down really tight. Most problems come from people not tightening these down properly. You don't need to even strip the wires. You just push them in and tighten it. But like I was saying, make sure you've got wire that comes all the way through to the end of this clear tube here, so that it's all the way through. Okay, so when you clamp down, the wire is here. I don't need quite this much cable here. I'm going to chop off a bit. What we're going to do here is I'm just going to cut the top part of this cable, make a little groove. Okay, and then we're just going to pull back this wiring a little bit. Just pull that back and expose the wires here. See how the solenoid wires come already pre-stripped? Just chop those little bits off and put that in the bin. So every single solenoid is connected to this black wire. We're going to wire every solenoid to this black wire, and each solenoid also has its own individual wire. So just so you can see, I've pushed the solenoid wire through, just gently got it through right to the back. So the wires went all the way through to the back of this gel connector. Same as this wire, the black wire. All the way through to the back. And then we're going to use these large multi-grips and just clamp that down. Nice and tight. Now, I generally go over it a couple of times. In the middle and on the edges. Just make sure that it's clamped properly, okay? Should be fairly flat, like that. You shouldn't have that bit, the blue bit sticking out too much. Okay, and just check. You can see both wires have went through. You can see the black wire and the black and white wire. So that's our first wire wired up. Now each solenoid has their own individual wire, as well as all of them being joined and earthed to the black wire. So we're going to put the red for the master valve. So you can pick any wire. Generally do red or brown. Again, I made sure that I can see the wires and that they're all the way through. Okay, so that's the master valve wired up. We've got some spare wires here if we need to connect onto. They also run to the other valves. We've got the master valve wires as well. And we'll put a nice neat box over this to house this. It'll sit here really neatly. And we'll tape it up when we put the box on it. So again, just to reiterate, each valve has its own individual wire. And every valve is connected into the black wire. So see the solenoid, the coil on the top there, and see those two wires that come up? One goes to the individual solenoid wire and one goes to the black wire that every single valve is joined into. It doesn't matter which one of those wires goes to either, as long as one of those wires coming from the top of the solenoid goes into the individual solenoid wire. And this individual solenoid wire is wired to the corresponding terminal in the controller. You'll see that later on. In the controller, we're going to wire this red wire into the port in the controller that says M, which stands for master valve. And the black wire is going to go to a port that says C, common. And every black wire is connected to this black wire. Okay? But not every valve is connected to the individual valve wire. So every valve has their own individual wire, and they're all connected to the black common wiring.